Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cold Brew Castle Sports Podcast. I am once again joined by our avid sports fan Lami up here, and Joe Flaherty, a sports editor for US Today affiliates. Thank you guys for being here. How are you guys doing today?
I'm
Just
good. I'm good.
excited. Just excited that Jack Cohn was named the starter of Notre Dame football, a quarterback. Oh, cheers.
Fun. So today we got a fun show planned for you. We're going to talk about a couple of the fantasy news things coming out of camp, and then also we're going to get into our rounds 5 through 9 mock draft, and then we're going to give you some preseason week 1 winners and losers, and that'll be our show. So with all that being said, let's start off with our first bit of news. Go ahead, Joe. You were the one that sprung it on me earlier, so you go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, just earlier today we had a training camp cut. Alfred Morris got cut by the New York Giants. Now, I'm not as familiar with the Giants running back situation right now as some other people are, but, it's just, it speaks to me that if, Saquon Barkley was questionable for the first couple weeks of the regular season, that they wouldn't be cutting any running backs off their roster this early. So I think it's great. If you're a Saquon Barkley stan and you're a top 5 running back, PPR, Saquon Barkley could go number 1. If that's you, I think this news is right up your alley and you're super excited.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good news for Barkley in general, which makes me feel a little bit better about how we took Barkley 4th overall in our draft last Tuesday. But I definitely agree. There's been some other small news, but it's not really anything that super impacts fantasy. There are some reports that Travis Etienne is not getting many reps with the first team, which is a little bit concerning. So let's go ahead and move forward and get into our rounds 5 through 9 of our mock draft. Obviously, last week we did rounds 1 through 4. If you want a quick refresher, let me just throw this up for 2 seconds. This was our first 4 rounds. If you want to take a look at it, just go ahead and pause and read this. And that's where we were at the beginning. If you're just listening through audio, I apologize, but I can't do anything. So let's go ahead, and we're going to do this right this time. So we got to remember that when we snake, we got to change the order so we don't mess up. But we'll start off with Joe again.
Well, now that we're here, kind of giving ourselves a refresher too. So Christian McCaffrey, Calvin Ridley, Patrick Mahomes, DJ Moore. This is pretty much your anchor back, hero running back strategy, whatever you want to call it. And at this point, in a league where you're going to have a flex spot, I think wide receivers are your best flex play. So, Castle, if you want to pull up the wide receiver rankings, we can go ahead and see where those are at. So now that we're here and we're looking at this, these are the wide receivers that are still on the board. Now, if you're asking me about wide receivers that I'm a little bit concerned about, I think all three of those top 3 guys that are up there on the board are very concerning. Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, Jamar Chase are all, high risk, high reward plays this year, especially with, other wide receivers taking a bulk of the fantasy share from them. I think Tyler Lockett's a safe play here. I think Kenny Golladay is probably someone you want to avoid. But if you're talking about in terms of guys that are going to surprise a lot of people this year, I think Brandon Ayuk should be the pick.
Yeah, and I'm a pretty decent fan of that pick.
I know that there's a lot of guys who are, ahead of him right now, but by the time Trey Lance is named the starter in San Fran, Brandon Ayuk's going to be ahead of those guys. So,
Mm-hmm. All right, and now it's Lami's choice.
Yeah, so I do think Brandon Ayuk is a good pick there. I'm not as high at this ADP of reaching down for Brandon Ayuk. And with Amari Cooper being pulled off the PUP list, I'm a little bit less worried about him than before. And for me, it's between with this team, which is also seems to be going with the anchor back strat. I think it's either Amari Cooper or Adam Thielen. I think here I would just take Cooper because I think Dak Prescott's going to have another monster year, barring another injury.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very similar to Joe of the opinion that I'm staying away from Amari Cooper. I'm really staying away from like Kenny Golladay. I think with this team, I've obviously gone to Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift, George Kittle, Kyler Murray. So this is gonna be my first wide receiver off the board. So I have 2 options. I could really go for consistency and a high floor low ceiling type player like Adam Thielen. I think that's what he is, or Tyler Lockett. But I think I'm gonna actually go for the wild card pick, and I'm gonna go with Jamar Chase. And this could backfire, in the season, but I do think that Jamar Chase has all the talent in the world to be the number one wide receiver there. I think T. Higgins might end up being the number one, but I think that there's going to be enough passing volume because that offensive line is not great, and I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball super well. I think there's going to be enough passing volume to take a bit of a flyer on a guy like Chase. Because if he works out and he goes nuts, that's going to be a great wide receiver one. I will say there has been some news out of camp that he's not progressing as quickly as some people would have liked him to progress, and that is a bit concerning. But when you're talking about wide receivers, there's still so many. So I'm going to take a little bit of a risky pick here, knowing that I have Kamara and Swift and Kittle and Murray to fall back on, because those guys, they're pretty easy, guaranteed 80 points a week. So I'm trying to hit on some wide receivers here. So that'll be my pick for this round.
And then at this point, I think if you're looking at this team, you have Saquon Barkley. I think he's going to be back week 1. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You got 2 running backs. You got 2 wide receivers that you're comfortable with. I think you could look at a quarterback if you want to go early here. I don't think Lamar Jackson would be the pick for me. I think you got to choose someone that's going to have a higher floor as far as the passing situation goes. And you already have CeeDee Lamb on your roster, and stacking is a strategy in fantasy football. So I think you're going to reach down a little bit. You're going to take the next quarterback off the board, and I think that's going to be Dak Prescott.
I'm probably staying away from Dak in most drafts, but I do like Dak a lot. It's just I'm not sure how he's going to come back from that injury.
Super worried about the injury. He's had so much time to heal. I think the only slightly concerning thing is maybe this shoulder thing on his throwing arm that's kind of been trickling out news. But even that seems to be getting better week to week. So I'm not super worried about Dak Prescott. I do still think for me, I draft quarterbacks super late, so it's still too early for me to look at a quarterback, even like Lamar Jackson or Russell Wilson here. And with McLaurin being the only receiver on this team, I kind of want another receiver that, to what Dustin was saying earlier, kind of has a high floor. Maybe not the highest ceiling, but somebody who's going to be kind of consistent from week to week. So I think here I would take Adam Thielen from who's here.
Yeah, I think that's a solid pick. Again, I think Thielen is a guy who could have a lower ceiling than last year because his touchdowns might come down a bit. With the emergence of what I expect to be a better year for Irv Smith, Justin Jefferson is still quite good, but I do still think that Adam Thielen is the number one red zone wide receiver there, or pass catcher. Obviously Dalvin Cook's going to play a part. But I think Thielen still might get, a similar amount of touchdowns. It's just less reliable. So with the next pick, I've got Derrick Henry and Antonio Gibson. I think they'll be 2 of the best running backs all year. I've got Allen Robinson and Cooper Kupp, who are PPR monsters. I'm pretty excited about this pick in general. But I think I really want to lock down the next position on my team. So it's you look at quarterback or tight end, and there's really good options. I don't like Lamar Jackson as much because I just don't think his passing stats are there. He's obviously one of the best runners at the quarterback position in the league, but he was number 10 last year. He was QB 10, and I don't want to draft him as QB 5. If I were going to take a QB here, I would definitely take Justin Herbert, but I don't really want to take a quarterback here. I'm going to lock in TJ Hawkinson and have what I think can be one of the highest volume, best tight ends in the league. And I'll be happy with those running backs, those wide receivers, and my tight end being locked up.
Well, now that we're here and A.J. Brown and Chris Godwin are both on the board, I think they can both be top 10 wide receivers this year. I think you are decently set at running back, and I'm not in the interest of drafting Kareem Hunt on the same team that I have Nick Chubb. I think that's a little bit too early to have a handcuff pick, and you're missing out on taking a starting player here. At this point, I'm probably looking at to see if I can get a good flex option at wide receiver. And every year we talk about wide receivers that are just getting better and better each year, getting more targets and even more PPR points. And I think Tyler Lockett should be the pick here. And I think he'll be able to put up top 10 wide receiver numbers this year as well. So locking in 3 top 10 wide receivers on the same team, I think that's golden.
I'm actually kind of upset with you because that was going to be my pick for this team. I'm really
sniped.
I don't. So this team is kind of looking for a second running back fairly soon here, but I do not like Miles Gaskin. There were some things in this first preseason game that kind of makes me wary on Miles Gaskin's position in the team going forward, and I'll talk more about that later. Um, and then Kareem Hunt is a solid flex play, but it's kind of I don't know how I feel about him as a number two. That being said, we're getting to the point where there's not too many running backs left. We're getting into the 20th running back taken already. So at some point, these teams are going to have to just take a running back. And having Darrell Henderson as your starter and Kareem Hunt as the second starter is going to be my pick here. You're not too comfortable with that. You're just hoping that with the no running back strat that Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and Julio Jones really carry you every week, and that you just get moderate RB2 play from both Kareem Hunt and Darrell Henderson.
Yeah. And I think that's a reasonable pick. I definitely thought you were going to go a different direction, and then I was like, but Kareem Hunt's right there. And I think Kareem Hunt is like a floor. His floor is a good flex play, and his ceiling is a running back too. So I think he's a great player to take a bit of a risk on, but like when you have Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Julio Jones, is he that much of a risk, or is he just like padding? And he's definitely the PPR back, or he's definitely the passing back there. So I think
if anything ever happens to Chubb, you have somebody in top 10 contention for just based on touches alone.
Yeah, so with this next team, so obviously this team went Kelsey first, Najee Harris second, Josh Allen third, and then Travis Etienne fourth. After what has come out from camp and Etienne's usage, I'm kind of regretting that Etienne pick. But, this is what happens when you finish a mock draft a week later. If it was today, I would probably take Darrell Henderson over Travis Etienne, especially seeing how poor the Rams running backs did in that preseason game. I expected, Xavier Jones and Jake Funk. I expected one of them to like pop out a little bit, and they really didn't. But going with this information, I have to go wide receiver here. Like, there's no way I can't. And I'm just gonna lock in Deontay Johnson. I think he's got the favor of Big Ben, so I think he's going to likely be the best receiver. And I think Deontay Johnson has a lot of potential to be a league winner. Like a guy that's being drafted in the mid rounds that ends up finishing in like the top 5 to 10 wide receiver range. But like with this team, you need to take a potentially huge breakout player for wide receiver, since this is going to be your wide receiver one.
Well, if you're looking at this team here, you already have Austin Eckler, you got David Montgomery, you got DeAndre Hopkins, you got Mike Evans. You're basically set at all in those positions. As far as the quarterbacks that are here, I'm not a very big fan of Lamar Jackson yet at this ADP. I think Russell Wilson could be a great pick here. However, I think we're going to steer clear of quarterback, and we're going to go over and we're going to look at these wide receivers that are available. And if you're going to talk to me about Kenny Golladay, I don't think he's a viable fantasy option this year. I don't think Michael Thomas should be even this high on the ADP board as we're talking about it right now. But if there's a wide receiver sitting here on this board right now that I really enjoy, I think it's T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins could easily outpace Jamar Chase as the number one wide receiver in Cincinnati. He already proved that he could put up top 10 numbers while he was playing with Joe Burrow as his quarterback in his rookie season. And I think it's possible that could happen again. So T. Higgins is a choice here.
He sniped me again. So basically, this team really needs a second wide receiver. I'm not super high on Golladay. I'm, just because I don't like the Giants. I think the Giants are going to be really run heavy. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to do that much other than hand the ball to Barkley. Michael Thomas, you don't want him to be one of your starters, at least early in the season. You want to be able to stash him on your bench for a few weeks until he's back and ready to go. And same thing with OBJ. OBJ, I think for me is like a wide receiver 3 with like super flyer upside. He's not somebody you just want to take. So I think right here, instead of reaching to a receiver that can probably get, on the turn here, I think I'm actually going to take Russell Wilson and just short quarterback play here and try to use the high quarterback play in some of these other positions to kind of balance out the lack of receiver on this team.
I agree with that last pick. Russell Wilson was definitely a guy that I was looking at this pick. But this team is kind of that team that's just like taking what falls to them. and, taking a couple risks. Obviously, we took Jonathan Taylor, although Jonathan Taylor's stock is rising, seeing that Carson Wentz might be back in week 1 or 2. Good news came out of camp after the surgery, but they've got DK Metcalf. They can't really wait on a player like Michael Thomas, so he's totally not on my radar. I would say that Team 8 is the most likely team to take Michael Thomas because they have a year and a half to wait because they have 3 of the best wide receivers in the league. So I think for this pick, you kind of just take what's coming to you and you go for your like slightly risky strategy, and you just lock in Kenny Galladay and Odell Beckham Jr. because I think that both of them have wide receiver 2 upside, but more likely they'll end up being a flex play. But if you can double up on them and, you're just hoping that one of them, hits. I do think that Odell Beckham is pretty undervalued. I understand why he's undervalued, but I think that he's going to be quite a bit better. And if you take both Beckham and Galladay, you're locking in that, like, you might have to start matchups with the two of them. But, like, between the 3, Metcalf, Galladay, and Beckham, I feel like you're pretty comfortable that you're going to have 2 strong wide receivers each week. And then you can fill out the rest of your team with the rest of the draft and with waiver pickups.
So this team is still looking for a wide receiver 2. It's doing pretty well on the other positions in terms of starters. Aaron Jones is going to be great. Chris Carson's a great complement to that. Kyle Pitts is it's kind of a big question mark on how he's going to do, but also has probably the best potential out of all the other tight ends that aren't Kelsey, Waller, or I think here you reach down a little bit. It's only like half a round earlier than his ADP. You just grab Juju. I think Juju is going to have the most consistent play in terms of like floor level, like fantasy production of all the receivers on that team. Because even last year, if you had him on your team, you felt like he was kind of a disappointment, but he still put up the best numbers on that team on a week-to-week basis, like on average. I think he ended up wide receiver 18 in PPR.
Oh, as you look at this team here, we're pretty much set at almost every single of our top, 5 positions. You got your flex play, you got 2 great wide receivers, 2 great running backs. I think at this point you're thinking about depth at both positions. But, you could easily target a quarterback here. However, I don't think this team should target a quarterback right now. I think we're going to hold off on drafting a quarterback. As far as the tight ends go, as soon as we get to Hawkinson, in my personal opinion, unless it's the best player available on the board, you're totally skipping out on tight end and you're waiting for those late round guys that are going to come in. So if you're going to look at anything here, I think you're looking at running back. So if we can go over to see the running backs that are available, and you can see here that, you got James Robinson, Javonte Williams, Myles Gaskin, all at the top of the list. 2 of those guys are going to have timeshares with other running backs. Javonte Williams and James Robinson can both easily split carries this year. Hopefully Travis Etienne is able to get more fantasy production from his passing game usage this year. But both of them are not targets for me right now. And we'll talk about later why Myles Gaskin has fell down my board as well. I think the best running back here left on the board that could easily be a running back 3 or a flex play this year, and that's Mike Davis. I think Mike Davis is the only running back that's going to get usage in Atlanta. He's going to get passing down work. He's going to be running the football. Is he going to be efficient at that? Probably not, but as far as volume goes, and you're kind of chasing volume at this point, Mike Davis is the way to go.
Yeah, and I just to comment on that a little bit before I make my pick, I understand that thought process, but for me, Mike Davis is like one of the biggest traps in the draft, in my opinion. He's going to get some volume in Atlanta, and hope, maybe I'm wrong because maybe Arthur Smith's going to totally change that offense. But I think that like the reason why his offense works so well in Tennessee is because he had Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. I think when you move over to having like Mike Davis as your best running back and then a completely immobile quarterback in Matt Ryan, I think you really lose out a little bit on the potential to run the offense that he wants to. With this pick, this team has, Kelsey, Harris, Allen, Etienne, Johnson. So we're looking for another wide receiver. And I think, again, you just go with like the potential upside. And I'm going to snap pick Jerry Jeudy here. Everything coming out of camp is that Jerry Jeudy is looking incredible. He's making plays on plays. He looked great in the preseason game. Drew Lock looked good. So if Lock's going to take a step forward, then Jerry Jeudy just gets benefit from that. It is a bit of a reach that, you're reaching over a couple other people, but there's this kind of trend when it comes to Denver. Their second wide receiver tends to be the one that has a better fantasy season. I don't know why that ends up happening, but the projected second wide receiver, it happened with Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas a few years back. It happened with Cortland Sutton, and I forget who was the number one at that point. And I think it's going to happen again this year. I think Judy's going to be great. Although I do like KJ Hamler too. Like, I think that whole offense is poised for a good year.
All right, so we're back on the what started as a no running back strat. You have three great wide receivers. You're a little bit concerned at your starters for running back. So I think right here is a perfect time to go down and take James Robinson, especially with, we talked about a little bit earlier, the new concerns with ETN. I think James Robinson's stock should actually rise a little bit, and I think right here he's a great third back to pick up to kind of shore up your running back.
Breaking news: the Eagles just waived Kerryon Johnson.
Well, Chicken Legs was hurt again, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, he got waived partially because of his injury, but partially because I just don't. I think unfortunately his career might be at an end. Not quite the same as like Javid Best, because he didn't have quite the same talent that Best had, but it's just a similar situation. Lions running back, has a lot of talent, shows some flashes, and then all of a sudden he's just hurt for his entire career. Such a bummer.
Again, I've already talked about my strategy, and the reason why I think Mike Davis is a much better back than James Robinson at this point is because of the volume share. There's no one else in Atlanta that's going to be getting anything that Mike Davis is going to be getting. There's no timeshare there. And, you're kind of chasing guys who are going to have a huge volume this year. And I think Jerry Jeudy is honestly, the number one wide receiver in Denver, especially with Cortland Sutton coming back, from an injury. So I actually think Cortland Sutton is going to be the player that you should choose in Denver instead of Jerry Jeudy. However, Jerry Judy's the younger guy. He's only 22 years old. If I'm picking anybody in a startup dynasty draft, I'm taking Jerry Jeudy all the time.
Not if I get him
but
first.
At this point, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said not if I get him first.
Not if you get him first. That's right. We'll see how that goes. But obviously, this team, you have all three positions. Again, you got your two running backs, you got your three wide receivers. At this point in the draft, I think, you could be looking at quarterback again. I think this team is definitely in the position to take the best player available. Obviously, there's no stacking potential available for this team right now. And I still am not looking at Myles Gaskin as a running back to take yet here. I think Lamar Jackson is the best player on the board. He's the best quarterback on the board. Some will argue differently, but as far as your PPR goes, he's going to have a huge benefit to his rushing ability, and he's going to have a great volume there. You're also stacking him with J.K. Dobbins, and I understand that, if you're looking at, J.K. Dobbins losing some of those goal line carries, that's fine, but this offense is going to be running the ball 400 times this year. The share of the volume in the backfield, as far as rushes go, is still going to be astronomically higher than any other team, so you really don't need to worry about that. And Lamar Jackson is going to be checking down the J.K. Dobbins all the time, and if J.K. Dobbins is getting 6 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown, Lamar Jackson is going to be doing well that week too. So
I agree with that to an extent. However, for me, Lamar Jackson is barely in my top 10 fantasy quarterbacks this year. So I think it's a fine pick, because obviously if that's the top quarterback on your board, I still personally I might take Lamar Jackson over Aaron Rodgers. But Justin Herbert is my guy as far as when it comes to this pick. However, for this team, I'm not going to take a quarterback. If I were to take a quarterback, it would be Justin Herbert. But I'm actually looking to get my flex play here, and I'm going to lock in a guy who's probably going to be a timeshare but might have some upside in Javonte Williams. I think he has the potential to take the starting job from Melvin Gordon. I think Melvin Gordon's good, but I just don't think he has the explosiveness that Javonte Williams might bring. And so when you're looking for a solid flex play and a third running back, I think you can't go wrong by taking Javonte Williams. I would actually probably take Javonte Williams over both Robinson and Mike Davis. So the fact that he fell to me here after both of those guys makes me pretty excited.
Yeah, so I think this is the first team that realistically has wanted to look at Thomas. We've got most first starters set. We could still use a flex play. But with who's still left on the board, I'm not comfortable taking these quarterbacks so early when they're because there's just better options at this point in the draft. I don't want a running back in Myles Gaskin. You can make an argument for Chase Edmonds, but I think I'd rather short Michael Thomas and really get when he comes back potentially a really good wide receiver one to go with McLaurin and Thielen.
Well, obviously, if we didn't take Dak Prescott in the, I believe that would be the 5th round. I mean, at this point, you would have been taking Justin Herbert because that would have been a great stack with Keenan Allen. That's why I like the versatility of that, how we drafted so far with this pick. At this point, I think you're looking at a flex play, so you're looking at the best wide receiver available on the board. So if we go to the wide receivers and we look at this board here, I think there's a lot of guys that you can talk about having injury concerns. I think Cortland Sutton, we'll see how he returns. Devontae Smith has injury concerns and he's playing with Jalen Hurts. I think that matchup will be great in like 2 years from now with Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts. And Chase Claypool, unfortunately, has Big Ben as his quarterback. I think you have to take the risk here. At this point, DJ Chark is a steal for me in this draft. We've talked before how I think he has wide receiver 10, top 10 potential. And he was on pace for those numbers last year. And all he has to do is have great quarterback play from Trevor Lawrence. And he's the official steal of this draft. He can win you this league if you're drafting him this late.
At this pick, obviously, I already have Kyler Murray. Otherwise, I would be taking Justin Herbert here. I'm probably gonna. This is a little bit of a reach, but like you obviously need to go wide receiver, and I think this would be a great situation where you go like team rookie wide receiver, but not Devontae Smith because I think his injury is a problem. I'm not really excited to go with him. I'm gonna reach a little bit. I'm gonna take Jalen Waddle from Miami. All reports have said that Tua looks better than he did last year. I think that, especially for week 1, like obviously in week 2, this might change up a bit, but week 1, there's no Will Fuller. He's suspended for a game. Like they're going to have to generate a way to develop their offense through guys that are fast. And because Tua is not going to be pushing down the field a ton. I think Jalen Waddle is going to be a huge part of at least week 1. So, you're drafting him because I think he can be successful from week 1 on. I think he can be successful throughout the whole season. He's got speed. Like, people were comparing him to Tyreek Hill in the draft. I think you go with Waddle and Chase here, and you might.
Yeah. So for this pick, you're on the anchor back strap, but I think right around now, like round 6-ish, round 7, you're really starting to look at the other running backs that are available to try to start picking up some more because obviously you have to play 2 every week. I think this is the earliest. At the absolute earliest, I'm interested in Myles Gaskin, and I could go down here a little bit, grab Chase Edmonds or Melvin Gordon. But I think on the off chance that what we saw was just kind of a preseason fluke, I will take Myles Gaskin here. I think this is about where he should probably go, at least earliest in most drafts. If this seems to be like his trend. But we'll talk more about that later. But you just really need to start getting more running backs onto these teams that only took the Free or the Cook or the Kamara in the early rounds.
I'm glad that you decided to take Myles Gaskin, so I didn't have to deal with drafting him myself. So we'll go with the better option, in my opinion, at this point for running back, and we're going to go ahead and draft Chase Edmonds. James Conner is there in Arizona, but he's going to be nothing more than maybe a goal line, snipe every once in a while. They only brought him in for vet minimum. He hasn't been getting much time in training camp. I can't see Chase Edmonds not getting 25 carries a game this year like he did when he did enter the starting role. And Arizona has been known to feed their running backs more than 20 carries a game and there's no one else on that team that's going to take away those carries other than James Conner. And that may happen, once every few games. So I think he's a quality wide running back too at this point if you're going hero running back strat. And then, even though we just took a running back, I think it's more than okay at this point with the anchor back strat to go out and get a guy that you think is going to be a high upside running back. And if you're looking at the running backs that are still on the board, there's obviously clearly a rookie on a team this year who's probably going to steal that starting role as we get down into like week 6 or week 7. You don't need him to start right away for your team. But, eventually he's going to take over that starting role from Raheem Mostert, and that's Trey Sermon. I think Trey Sermon is a great high upside rookie pick here. And if he truly catches on, like I think he will, he can put up at least 100 yards each week in that San Francisco 49ers offense and be a running back too for you if Chase Edmonds doesn't work out.
I've got more to say about Trey Sermon, but I'm going to talk about him later.
Yeah, so I think here you kind of want to look at another running back, but there isn't too many good ones on the board currently that I can see. You can reach for Melvin Gordon here. Personally, I think this is where you want to start getting a little bit interested in quarterback, round 7, 8, 9. Justin Herbert falling this far is actually kind of insane. In most of your drafts, he's going to be going by like the 5th. In your 12-team leagues, people tend to be very high on quarterbacks. Mahomes has been going in the 2nd, Josh Allen, early 3rd. So Justin Herbert in the 7th, I think is kind of a steal, and that's who I'm going to pick for this team.
And that's who I would have picked there too. I think Herbert's a great choice. This pick, I think that at this point, you've got a couple of good rookie wide receivers that are hopefully going to explode. You definitely want to look wide receiver here, though, again. And you could go with the trifecta and go triple rookie, but we're not going to do that because that seems a little bit crazy, especially with Chase Claypool right here. Devontae Smith's injuries worry me too much, and Claypool at least has the potential to have some really strong weeks. He may not be the most consistent guy, but he's potentially going to have strong weeks. And now we're off to Joe again.
At this point, after Chase Claypool comes off the board, I think he would have been a great pick here for this team. And you're just looking at who's the guy who could make an impact on my bench this year. You already have a quarterback, so we're not going to be drafting one again in this draft. I think you could look at tight end here, and I think tight end is probably the best player available right now. I think Noah Fant is going to get a lot of looks this year. He finished really well last year. He was a top 15 tight end. He's only going to get better. He may be the most athletic of the receiving options for Drew Lock or Teddy Two Gloves, whoever starts this year. But I think Noah Fant's a great pick here.
I do like that pick, especially because we're getting to the point where like the tight ends are starting to really drop off, and I think he's one of the last ones in kind of like that mid tier. This team's going to take another wide receiver. I think it's still a little early on Rodgers. You can make the case for him. I like Rodgers round 8. I'm just going to take Devontae Smith with this pick.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Assuming that Devontae Smith does get healthy for week 1, who else are they going to throw to?
I think if he can get to 100% for week 1 and he stays healthy, I think he has the clearest path to be last year's Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and then this pick right here, it's pretty easy for me. I just snap up Aaron Rodgers. He was the 2nd best quarterback last year, and you're getting him at quarterback 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarterback number 8.
And at this point, I like Dallas Goedert a lot, but not right here in round 7. So you're probably looking at a backup running back situation. Your running back 3 on your roster. So you're going to be taking a look at the running backs that are still available at this point. And if you look at the board here, Melvin Gordon, Raheem Mostert, Ronald Jones, and Leonard Fournette are all guys that I am not high on. They're going to be sharing a lot of volume with each other this year. And Melvin Gordon and Raheem Mostert may be out of the starting role by halfway through the season. The one running back that's still on the board that I think is a little bit early to take him here, but honestly, as a running back 3, I think it's a perfect option, and the guy that isn't going to be having a share with his volume, and I think that's going to be Michael Carter. Michael Carter is going to be getting most of the carries in New York, and we saw him do that this past preseason week, and I think he's going to be a solid option for you on your bench this year.
I'm not high on Dallas Goedert, especially we don't know how Philly is going to look this year. But we have 3 running backs, we have 3 wide receivers. I think right here you probably just take another running back because your top end receivers are so good that barring injury, I think you're really just trying to shore up and get extra consistency at the running back to really give yourself the best chance to win the league. So I think here I would probably take Ronald Jones. I think is the running back that I'm most comfortable with out of the ones that are on the board currently. Although there is some concern based on this last preseason game, but it could just be preseason one kind of fluff news. But we'll see how that turns out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Ronald Jones a bit. With this pick though, I'm pretty happy. Like I feel like I'm super set at wide receiver, with Deontay Johnson and Jerry Jeudy. So I think here I would just lock in Melvin Gordon as my running back 3, and potentially my running back 2 if ETN doesn't get the volume that you expect. Definitely week 1 would be Melvin Gordon starting over ETN. ETN might be your flex play, but he definitely wouldn't be starting over Melvin Gordon at the beginning of the year.
And I think that's a good pick. At this point, if you're taking any of these running backs are up, you're just hoping for the upside that, they keep their volume the same as it will be on week 1 and that the rookies don't overtake them. And I think that's a decent strat to go with at this point. However, you're always looking for who's the guy who's going to be getting the most volume on the board that I can see right now. And I believe the next guy that you're going to be looking at, if you're looking at options at who you're going to be putting on your bench, you're going to be looking at the wide receivers that are still on the board. And I think that if you go there, you're going to be able to see that, if you scroll down the board, and I think it is a little bit of a reach at this point, but I think Curtis Samuel is a great option at this point. I think he's going to be going a lot higher than his ADP will. I know this is a huge reach. It's very much a pick that people are going to be upset about, especially at this point. I think you can draft him a couple rounds later, but I think by the time, if you're drafting now, maybe this isn't the pick for you, but if you're drafting more towards right around week 1 of the regular season, I think Curtis Samuel is going to see a major boost in his ADP because he's off the PUP list. He's going to be healthy. He's a wide receiver 2 option in Washington. I think he's a perfect pick for a bench player.
Mm-hmm.
And he did show flashes last year of being able to give fantasy production. So like it's not so far off to see him as a solid wide receiver 2 once he starts playing at full potential. Which team am I picking for?
Pick 11.
Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, so here you're 2-2. You're looking to kind of just take the best player off the board at this point, between wide receiver or running back. I'm really down on Raheem Mostert. I really do think Trey Sermon is going to take his job at some point during the season. I think the best option here is probably going down and grabbing Deebo Samuel.
So I think for this pick, you go ahead and you just lock in Cortland Sutton, and then you could go quarterback, you could go running back, but I think here I'm just going to lock in Dallas Goedert as my tight end. I think Goddard is going to take a step forward this year. He was already pretty good last year, and Ertz is with the team, but I still don't have hope. I still believe that Ertz at some point will get traded. We're just not sure when. But I think you lock in Goddard there.
Yeah, and I think that makes this pick pretty easy. You're looking for some depth at running back now. You have your 2 starters, and realistically, is Trey Sermon going to take the spot from Mostert? Yes. But can you get some good flex, to running back 2 production out of him early on in the season? Absolutely. So I think Mostert falling this far is a perfect pick here to kind of help this team through the early weeks before they need to pick up waiver wire picks and stuff.
Well, at this point, it's a situational thing. You have Mike Evans on this roster right now. You have Hopkins. I think, if you're looking down the board at, these other teams that have selected, you still got a couple teams that are going to be ahead of you on the turnaround from, round 7. A couple of them might be looking at the best quarterback on the board. You don't have a quarterback yet on your roster, and it's a perfect opportunity to stack Mike Evans with his, buddy in Tampa, and that's Tom Brady. Expect that offense to be even better this year than it was last year.
Yeah, and then with this team, you're really just looking at running back, wide receiver, and you guys know I'm high on Robbie Anderson, so I'm going to lock that in for this team. He's he potentially could start over Deontay Johnson or Jerry Jeudy if one of them doesn't work out.
Yeah, with this team, you're fairly set on your starters. You have a little bit of extra depth at running back to help shore that position up. You really want to start looking now at your other positions like quarterback or tight end. And I really like Mike Gesicki here. I think that Tua is going to progress and do a lot better this year, and I think his connection with Gesicki last year showed some good flashes. And I think that he's a great late pickup if you're waiting for one of those late round tight ends.
Yeah, I don't feel like Joe's a little sad at this point because he would have liked to have Gesicki with this pick.
Would have been nice, however, once these guys are off the board here, I think you're sending it on tight end. So we're not even looking at tight ends. You already got your third running back on your roster. You're probably only going to add one more guy if you're looking at keeping it wide receiver heavy, especially if you're running a wide receiver for your flex. So you got to take your first wide receiver flex option. If we look at the wide receivers that are still on the board, you got guys that are, going to be high upside, high risk guys this year. I think the best player that's still on the board that's going to be producing numbers that, could get them into a flex position role this year is going to be Brandon Cooks or Will Fuller. However, Will Fuller has the better quarterback play, so I'm going to go with Will Fuller.
Telling you, man, you're sleeping on Davis Mills. I'm joking. I'm totally joking. All right, so with this, it's me, right? Yeah, with this pick, you got your entire team laid out. You got great backups. You're really just looking for a backup wide receiver, and I'm not a huge fan of the Houston quarterback play. However, Tyrod Taylor in the preseason game looked pretty good. He looked exactly like he normally does. He was 4 for 4 for 40 yards. The dude's accurate. He's a great game manager. He probably will be the starter there pending legal whatever that we're not going to get into. But I'm pretty sure Tyrod Taylor will end up starting the entire year. And I'm going to lock in Brandon Cooks just because Cooks seems like he's going to be the wide receiver that gets the most volume out of the rest. And this isn't somebody you really need to start. It's just he could start if something goes wrong.
Here, I think you're looking to start filling up the last of your starter positions before you move on. You would like a little bit more running back depth, seeing as you only have 2 running backs. But I'm not really comfortable with like a Kenyon Drake type player. And I think right here is a great opportunity to draft a quarterback. Based on the preseason, before the preseason game that just happened, I probably would have taken Trevor Lawrence here. And I'm not super worried about him, but I think that I would much rather have Matthew Stafford. I think Stafford has the potential to have a much higher ceiling with the tools that he has there versus what Trevor Lawrence has in Jacksonville. And I think Matthew Stafford might be slightly underrated based on his past and the new tools he has.
Well, at this point, like you guys were saying, you're kind of just looking at guys that could be volume hordes and, taking in as much volume, of their workload for the teams that they play with this year. And I think you could easily look at, another wide receiver. But if I'm targeting a guy that I really want to be setting in on my bench as a running back, I think Damian Harris is a great choice. For now, he's going to be the starter in New England, and as soon as Cam Newton drops down below the depth chart, Damian Harris is going to be the top workloader as far as the rushing attempts go for that team. So look to him to also have some passing receptions this year.
Yeah, and at this stage, the person drafting here is sad because they were really interested in Damian Harris there. I will say Kamondre Stevenson had a crazy preseason game. It is preseason, so you can't freak out too much. But it lends itself to the world of another fantasy season where there's 4 running backs in New England that all get touches randomly in different games. So it's hard to trust anybody. But if I'm trusting anybody from that backfield, it's Damian Harris. I'm excited for him. He looked good in the preseason game too. But there is like some concerns there. I think here you just kind of go for a little bit of a flyer and you stick with wide receiver because you're really hoping to get somebody that like breaks out. And I think Laviska Shenault, I think Landry's good. He's a high floor wide receiver, but I think if you're looking for a breakout potential star, Laviska Shenault's right there. And I think he could be great.
Yeah, I think Landry is kind of at the point where he has a floor. It's going to be between 10 and 15 points. In most weeks, as long as the offense is functioning well. But he doesn't really have a ceiling. He's one of those players that I'm going to try to avoid because I don't think when you're picking players this late in the draft, you're kind of looking for players with the most outside potential that's predictable, right? So you're trying to avoid players like James White, in previous years where he's going to have a couple monster games, but you never know when they're going to be. You're looking for something that you can kind of predict where they're going to be, which is why if you pull up the running backs for this team, they desperately need a third running back. And from the ones that are still on the board, I'm kind of interested in AJ Dillon. You're kind of just picking him up, just hoping that he like so you're playing Cook and Gaskin every week. Like you're not really gonna have another option there. I don't like Fournette. I don't like Kenyon Drake. I don't think either of them should be drafted this high, especially. And then AJ Dillon is one of those guys where you know what he can do. If Aaron Jones ever goes out, you know to play him. He's he's a guy that you know when to play and when he's going to give you that fantasy production that you're looking for out of your bench players.
It's unfortunate that A.J. Dillon was just selected off the board by Lami, because that would have been a great pick here. And I think at this point you're looking at getting a wide receiver and a running back option. I still don't think you're drafting a tight end. So if you look at the running backs that are currently available, I think that there's a couple that you could select here at the top. I think Kenyon Drake and Leonard Fournette could both be strong handcuffs. If an injury happens to Josh Jacobs or any of those running backs in Tampa Bay, one of those guys who's still left on the team is going to skyrocket, right? And I think they're going to be great handcuffs. But however, I think there's still a guy on the board that's going to give you starting running back volume numbers this year, and I think it's Devin Singletary. I think he looked good in the preseason game against Detroit Lions. Say what you will about that team and their ability to stop the run this year, but I think he is a good bench running back for you to have. And now we're set at running back, so now we're just looking at receivers with the turnaround. And you're taking the best guy that you think is going to have a high upside year. And some of these guys I really enjoy, but we're going to go ahead and scroll down the list a little bit further. And we're going to look at guys that are going to be, questionable here at round 9. But I think you go up the board a little bit, and you're going to be looking at a guy in Chicago who's probably going to get better quarterback play, who looked like a wide receiver 1 last year if the ball ever got to him, but it usually sailed over his head because of poor quarterback play, and that's going to be Darnell Mooney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with that, we're going to wrap up our mock draft. This is the first 8 rounds plus 1 pick. We were going to go the full 9, but honestly, we're kind of at the point where a lot of these guys that are going to be drafted, a lot of them may not even make rosters for very long. It's really down to personal preference. Watch out for Logan Thomas. I think he's one of the biggest traps in the NFL as well. But these guys are not going to ever start unless injuries happen. And we're trying to keep it. We don't want to bore you guys too much with our talking. Trying to keep episodes to about 45 minutes to an hour. So we're going to end that there and leave you with, the last pick being Darnell Mooney. I think Mooney's a great pick. I think Mooney's a guy that's going really late. Same thing with Singletary. I really like both of those picks. But we're going to transition into our week 1 preseason winners and losers. We're going to each have 2 winners and 2 losers. We'll go ahead and start that with Joe.
Well, I know we kind of talked about it a little bit. If you listen to our other section of this podcast, which is our regular NFL breakdowns, I think we talked about it a little bit. And we also talked about it a little bit here. But my week 1 winner, and it's kind of winners, but we're just going to talk about the rookie quarterbacks. I think all of them performed decently to great. I think they all proved that they belong. And I think all of them proved that they could end up being the starters for their teams in the early season at the very latest. I think Justin Fields looked really good. I think he played the second and third stringer, so some people are going to knock him on that. However, if you're looking at the things that he did and the things that you want him to do as a quarterback for your team, he rushed, he had great rushing, he was great presence in the pocket, he was able to throw the ball downfield. He was going through his progressions. He looked like he's ready to take over as a starting quarterback, and the cream rises to the top. And I don't think Justin Fields is going to be sitting behind Andy Dalton for too long. Mm-hmm. Mac Jones looked like he should be the starting quarterback in New England. It's only a matter of time before that happens. It's only a matter of time before Trey Lance takes over. I actually think Trey Lance, played decently. He had the great throw that was hyped up on Twitter, all weekend long. But, a lot of these things just assured us. And then Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence just basically showed us that they're going to be the starting quarterbacks for their teams. So I think all the rookie quarterbacks won week 1 of the preseason.
Okay, so I was gonna do this one second, but because it ties to heavily to what Joe was just talking about, I'm gonna go with this one first. Basically, Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears offense as a whole, like the stuff that he showed he can do with moving around, getting outside the pocket, throwing across his body, finding directing traffic and finding the guy that's open while you're running away basically from all these defenders. It really showed flashes of what he can do, and I think that everybody on that offense is better for it. Even there were a lot of players last year who did fairly well, despite the very shaky at best quarterback play between the two quarterbacks, Nick Foles and Mitchell Trubisky. And Justin Fields, to compare him to Mitchell Trubisky last year, in the limited amount of time that he played in this game, he had 106 passer rating. Trubisky only had 2 games all of last season that he got above 105. And he averaged about 90, 93. Mm-hmm. So, this is a much better quarterback for this team, and I think that all the offensive components in this team are really going to see the difference week one.
Yeah. So for my winner, I'm gonna do the winner and then the loser, and then we're gonna go back the other direction, kind of like we're snaking. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that my main winner of the preseason was the entire Broncos team. I initially said the entire offense, but then I realized that they defensively had a great game too. Patrick Surtain got a pick 6, which is great because he's like their third cornerback on their roster. So if he turns out to be really, really good, they're going to have an insanely deep defense. Drew Lock looked great. KJ Hamler looked good. Jerry Jeudy looked good. Like, that offense looked way better than I think anybody expected it to, except for maybe Lami. And then the first loser, big loser from this weekend, I think, is Alvin Kamara, because of how poorly both Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston performed. I think you have to consider what defenses are going to do when they realize that it's Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston that are not very good at throwing the ball. What are they going to do? Are they going to stack the box against Kamara? Are they going to double Kamara? Are they going to force Jameis and Taysom to find other targets than Kamara, especially while Michael Thomas is out? I think Kamara is a huge loser, and it's funny because he didn't even play. So that's why I'm going to say. So let me go with your loser, and then we'll go to Joe. He'll say his loser, and then his next winner, and we'll reverse it.
So actually, I'm going to deviate here. I actually have to go with my other winner based on your loser. I actually have Kamara as a winner in all of this, based on that shaky quarterback play. When you're talking about fantasy, especially at the top end of running back, which he's going, in the top 5, overall in these drafts, you're really looking for talent and ability, as well as the chance, right? So volume in fantasy is king. So with nobody else on the team, even if he's very inefficient because they're double teaming him or they're stacking the box against him, he could be very inefficient and still have a great fantasy season because of just the sheer amount of touches and looks that he's getting throughout the year. And especially if you have somebody like Taysom Hill in there, sure, he might take a run play or two, but he can't throw a mid to long range ball very effectively. So they're going to be looking to dump off as many passes to Kamara as possible. And in a PPR league, especially, having that kind of extra upside to your running back one is just, I think, all the better.
Mm-hmm. Slight counter to that is that I think that if you have a quarterback that really can't push the ball downfield, that allows the defensive backs and linebackers to sit on routes. So it's going to be harder for them to do the dump off to Kamara because there's going to be people just sitting there waiting for him because they know that he's not going to throw the ball downfield. I do understand what you're saying, though, and it could work out, but he would need to catch 10 to 12 passes a game. And I don't know if that's realistic if you have a guy who's not able to hit the downfield ball. But still go ahead and go with your first loser, and then we'll just, I don't know, figure something out. You really threw this for a loop, Lami.
Well, I mean, you just talked about Kamara. If I have him in the winners, I kind of have to talk about it, my biggest loser that I saw from everything is Myles Gaskin, easily. He was the biggest part about Myles Gaskin's game was that he produced well when he was in in the game, right? When he played 65% of snaps or whatever, and that's what he averaged last year was 65% of snaps in the games that he played. But Malcolm Brown is here this year. And in this first preseason game, Malcolm Brown played 16 out of the 23 snaps that had Tua there. And, Malcolm Brown did the same thing last year to Cam Akers early in the season. He took a lot of touches away. And Myles Gaskin is no Cam Akers. So if Myles Gaskin loses even 30% of his touches throughout the games, I think that really inhibits his play and his potential and his ceiling for fantasy production.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right, on to Joe.
I mean, you've already touched on one of my losers. Myles Gaskin basically has dropped like 2 or 3 rounds on my ADP. And the fact that, we've heard before, every year we hear how much coaches like Malcolm Brown this and Malcolm Brown that, but we really haven't really seen it take fruition yet until this past preseason week. And if Myles Gaskin isn't a true running back 1 for the Miami Dolphins, then he's not going to be, getting that workload where he could be drafted round 4 or 5 in the ADP for this season. If he's not reaching that, then at best he's a flex player or running back 3 or 4. And for where he's getting drafted right now in the ADP, that's a tremendous drop for him. So I agree with Lami. And then I can't believe we're all just talking about the Saints here. We're just going to call this fantasy podcast episode the Saints are coming down. So I will touch real quickly on my other loser.
Go ahead and touch
out of order here.
Go ahead and touch on your loser and your next winner.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'll touch on my loser and winner, and then we'll end with Lami's last loser.
Sounds good. It's Adam Trautman and much of the Saints passing offense basically is my loser from this weekend. If you're looking at the sheer numbers, Trautman played 15 of 20 snaps with Taysom Hill in the game, which isn't bad, but 6 of those snaps were him running the ball, Taysom Hill running the ball or Alvin Kamara running the ball, and then 3 of the other 9 were Adam Trautman being asked to pass block, which leaves just 6 routes that Adam Trautman ran during that game. And if you're looking at how bad the quarterback play is going to be this year, it's not a good sign, especially if you're looking at Adam Trautman as a great late round flyer at tight end, which he was going into the offseason. Fantasy experts all across the league, whether you're talking about the Fantasy Footballers podcast and other people that are in the same realm as us, Adam Trautman was a late round fantasy target. I think that improves if Jameis Winston's the starting quarterback for them. But right now, with Taysom Hill getting most of the starting reps there in New Orleans, I think you got to say no to Adam Trautman as a late round flyer. Mm-hmm. And then for my other week 1 winner, it's just some of the rookie wide receivers, particularly Terrace Marshall, who I think had a tremendous fantasy efficient game. If it wasn't for Robbie Anderson there in a wide receiver 2 role for the Carolina Panthers, I'd say Terrace Marshall is on track to be a surprise fantasy value this year, especially you're looking at a dynasty, or a keeper league, a guy that you're drafting a 13th or 14th round. If he could haul in 60-yard passes like that every now and then, he could be a flex flyer week in and week out before he gets a larger role. Now, obviously, some of that was due to PG Walker being an absolute G in his first game this season. And if you know some of my opinions, I think PG Walker is a guy that could, maybe step up into a starting role if Sam Darnold gets injured. But Terrace Marshall is a guy to look out for. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown showed tremendous potential, even though he caught like 2 receptions. However, if you're looking at a dynasty play, if you're looking at a startup draft or your rookie draft, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown showed enough potential to be the Golden Tate of the Lions offense this year and for many years to come. And I think, if even though with his low production in week 1, he's obviously a winner, he looks good. He's got the swagger. He's got everything you're looking for a rookie wide receiver to have.
Yeah. So moving from that to my one of my biggest winners, and it's just Trey Lance. So ironically, my winner and loser are both from the same team, and they're both named Trey. So my winner is Trey Lance because he started off the game great. And honestly, his stat line doesn't show it because there were so many drops. I think there were 4 drops by receivers. Maybe it was only 3, but so many drops. The offensive line did not play particularly well, especially when the backups got in the game. But I think Trey Lance is poised to start week 1. I was not a believer when Joe initially was talking about him potentially starting week 1. I think he will. I don't think Garoppolo's going to impress for the rest of camp. I think Lance, if he doesn't start week 1, he'll start within the first few weeks because he's just that dynamic. And he showed his poise and his ability. My loser, though, is Trey Sermon because he had 9 carries for 26 yards. And that alone is not really a big deal because it is preseason, but like he averaged 2.6 yards per carry. And when you consider that he was against like seconds and thirds, that's a little bit concerning. But also, JaMychal Hasty had 60 yards on. I think he had like 8 or 9 carries for 60 yards. So the fact that JaMychal Hasty made a big impact like that could potentially lead to Trey Sermon maybe not getting the touches we expect from him early on. You know, obviously Mostert's going to be the starter until he gets hurt because he does every year. But I don't know if Sermon is going to end up unseating JaMychal Hasty based on that one performance. Also, the offensive line was not good for either one of them. So it's pretty concerning when the guy who's not being hyped up that much ends up with 40 more yards on about the same amount of carries. With that, go ahead, Lami, with your final loser.
Yeah. I'm on my next loser. So I don't know how many people are talking about him at this point. I know there's a few who have just loved him over the years after he had that one big year. Talking about David Johnson. People kind of scoffed when at the beginning of the preseason he was put on the depth chart 3rd behind both Phillip Lindsay and Mark Ingram. But the scary thing is, his last game he had the usage of a 3rd string running back. You know, he only played 2 snaps with Taylor, and both of them were 3rd downs, and Mark Ingram wasn't even available. Mm-hmm. You know, so I don't know how much people are still going to talk about David Johnson. You know, he's clearly past his heyday, his 1 year of greatness in terms of fantasy production. But I think that David Johnson's a loser here just because it really doesn't look like he's going to get any kind of relevant production to be anything more than a flyer for injuries.
Yeah, I think definitely David Johnson ends up being, like, if anything, the 3rd down back. I think Mark Ingram is the early down back. I think Phillip Lindsay is going to be maybe the premier back in that system. And David Johnson's just kind of going to fall by the wayside. You know, one injury happens, maybe he's going to be more dynamic, but he has not shown up. And I think we can all agree that the Jaguars are big winners because they don't have to deal with the situation that is Tim Tebow because he got cut today. They can get past that and people can stop getting mad that a quarterback is playing tight end. And we don't have to worry about that story in the NFL anymore.
Was he really playing tight end, though? Did you see that block or that fumble, I guess, where he just rolled down the side of the defensive lineman?
Yeah.
It was pretty bad.
Just a quick add to what you guys have been talking about. I mean, I think Trey Sermon didn't have that great of a game, but he still caught 2 catches for 14 yards, which is pretty good fantasy value for the limited amount of snaps that he had out there. And I think, to be fair, Raheem Mostert really hasn't really shown that he can be the starting running back in San Francisco. But, you know, I think you're right. He's still going to be the number 1 running back unless something happens early on. But I think Trey Sermon's talent potential still trumps him for me as far as ADP goes.
Yeah, I think the main thing about Mostert that just makes him appealing to a coach and a GM is his blinding speed. Like, he is one of the fastest running backs in the entire league. And if he could just stay healthy, he would be like a super great weapon. But I definitely don't see him playing 16 games. And I was hoping that that's where Trey Sermon would come in. But like I said, Hasty's performance makes me a little hasty about being in love with Sermon. See what I did there?
I think all running back 3s on rosters get fantasy value. I mean, you saw Detroit's, running back 4.
Craig Reynolds.
Value. this year, and he's not going to be starting over Jamar Jefferson in my opinion, or on
I
the
don't
depth chart at least. So
I don't think so either, man. But you put a couple more performances like that, they might not go with Jefferson because at the end of the day, he was a 7th-round pick. Like I don't know that like he hasn't shown anything in game. He had 5 carries for 4 yards or 9 yards or something, 1 catch for 4 yards. Like I got to see something from Jefferson. And
did Jamar Jefferson even play this past pre-week
he did, yeah.
preseason?
He
Okay.
did. He had like 5 carries for 9 yards and 1 catch for 4 yards.
Well, I know he's been bothered with an injury, but
Yeah.
as far as these rookies, I know people are so quick to dismiss college tape when we start talking about fantasy, but it is something that a lot of fantasy experts tell you to look at when you're looking at rookies. And Jamar Jefferson has great college tape,
Mm-hmm.
and while that doesn't necessarily translate well to the NFL in 4 years, in a 4-year outlook, but if you're talking about looking at why teams drafted rookies, Jamar Jefferson has breakout potential.
Yeah, I agree, but also it wasn't just Craig Reynolds that outperformed Jefferson in that game. Dedrick Mills also outperformed him. So when you think about the fact that Craig Reynolds is obviously in like year 3, I think, and Dedrick Mills is an undrafted free agent, I think that third running back position is wide open. And I do think that either Craig Reynolds, Jamar Jefferson, or Dedrick Mills, whoever doesn't make the team, they will end up on the practice squad unless another team poaches them. So we will probably see another one of them in Lions uniforms later.
You can put it on the board. Jamar Jefferson's going to be running back 3 for the Lions.
Put it on the board.
Put it on the board.
With that, that's going to end it for us today. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to get better at consistent uploading, but if you want to tune in next Tuesday for our fantasy portion, we will see you then. Thursday is going to be our first regular football portion because last week I ran out of power. You'll hear all about that in that podcast. But thank you guys for hanging out. I want to thank Lami and Joe for coming and being on with me. Thank you guys.
Yep, thanks for having us on. Great conversations today.
It's a good time.
Good. Awesome. So we'll see you guys next Tuesday, and it's been a blast. See you guys in the next one.